A blood test can now predict a mother's risk of postpartum depression. Scientists are learning more about this leading complication of childbirth, and treatments are improving. Postpartum depression affects some 1 in 8 women in the United States. It typically occurs in the first weeks after childbirth, after a sudden drop in levels of estrogen and progesterone. Kieferpics/Getty Images. Like many first-time mothers, Lizette Lopez-Rose thought childbirth would usher in a time of joy. Instead, she had panic attacks as she imagined that something bad was going to happen to her baby, and she felt weighed down by a sadness that wouldn't lift. The San Francisco Bay Area mother knew her extreme emotions weren't normal, but she was afraid to tell her obstetrician. What if they took her baby away? At about 6 months postpartum, she discovered an online network of women with similar experiences and ultimately opened up to her primary care doctor. About 2 months after I started medication, I started to feel like I was coming out of a deep hole and seeing light again, she says. Today, Lopez-Rose works at Postpartum Support International, coordinating volunteers to help new mothers form online connections. About 1 in 8 U.S. women go through a period of postpartum depression, making it among the most common complications of childbirth. It typically occurs in the first few weeks after delivery, when there's a sudden drop in the reproductive hormones estrogen and progesterone. As scientists unravel chemical and genetic changes caused by those shifting hormones, they are discovering new ways to diagnose and treat postpartum depression, and even ways to identify who is at risk for it. The hormones estradiol, the main form of estrogen, and progesterone rise during pregnancy. In some women, their sudden drop after childbirth triggers the onset of postpartum depression. The first-ever drug for postpartum depression, containing a derivative of progesterone, received U.S. Food and Drug Administration approval in 2019. That marked a new approach to the disorder. This winter, in another major advance, a San Diego-based startup company will launch a blood test that predicts a pregnant woman's risk of postpartum depression with more than 80% accuracy. The product, called Myluma, will be the first commercially available test to use biomarkers, molecules in the body, in this case the blood, to predict onset of a psychiatric disorder, much in the way that blood tests can detect signs of diseases like cancer and diabetes. Pregnant women who learn they are at risk for postpartum depression could take preventive steps such as taking antidepressants after childbirth or arranging for extra support. A blood test could reduce the stigma that keeps many women from seeking help, says Jennifer Payne, a reproductive psychiatrist at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville and a lead investigator on the studies that led to the new test. She is a founder and member of the scientific advisory board for the company that makes Myluma, Dionysus Health. If we have a blood test, it brings psychiatry down to the level of biology, which I think your average person can understand as something that needs treatment and that isn't just in somebody's head, she says. Unpredictable effects of hormones. Payne was a fellow at the National Institute of Mental Health in 2001 when she became intrigued by postpartum depression as a window into the onset of mood disorders. That led her to a key question: why does the sudden drop in hormones after childbirth greatly affect some women but not others? While it's not uncommon for women to experience transient feelings of anxiety and sadness within days of giving birth, only in some does a deeper and more persistent depression take hold. A blood test can now predict a mother's risk of postpartum depression. Lizette Lopez-Rose overcame her postpartum depression and now helps to coordinate support groups through Postpartum Support International. She and her daughter, now 4, are thriving. Courtesy of Lizette Lopez-Rose. As Payne's research evolved, she teamed up with Zachary Kaminsky, then a colleague at Johns Hopkins University, who studied the effects of estrogen on mouse brains. Kaminsky is an epigeneticist. He researches how small chemicals called methyl groups can attach to genes and affect how active they are. Environmental factors from pollution to nutrition can influence the extent of this reversible methylation. By comparing female mice given high levels of estrogen with those without it, Kaminsky found that estrogen caused specific gene methylation patterns inside cells in the hippocampus, a part of the brain that helps control mood. Those findings suggested what to look for in blood samples Payne had collected from 51 women with a history of mood disorders. The women had been tracked throughout their pregnancies and afterward, with some developing postpartum depression within 4 weeks of childbirth. 2 estrogen-sensitive genes emerged from the research, HP1BP3 and TTC9B. More than 80% of the women who had postpartum depression showed a distinctive pattern of greater methylation on one gene and less methylation on the other. What's more, the changes in the genes could be detected throughout each trimester of pregnancy, says Kaminski, now at the University of Ottawa Institute of Mental Health Research at the Royal. He also is a co-founder of Dionysus. In other words, even early in pregnancy, Kaminski says, you can predict the women that are going to get postpartum depression. That epigenetic research forms the basis of the myeloma test, which also incorporates additional biomarkers that improve its accuracy, says Kaminski. Beginning in January 2026, it is expected to become available at some doctors' offices in 3 states, Florida, Texas, and California. Though it isn't yet FDA approved, doctors are permitted to use such lab tests to help make clinical decisions. Zeroing in on steroids. Not everyone with postpartum depression has these epigenetic changes, so Payne and other researchers continue to hunt for other biomarkers to understand how hormonal changes trigger postpartum depression. They are zeroing in, for example, on neuroactive steroids, which the body makes from molecules like progesterone in the brain and other tissues. One of those metabolites, called allopregnanolone, has a calming effect. It affects a receptor in the brain called GABA-A, which is known to be involved in stress reduction. Allopregnanolone rises during pregnancy and drops swiftly after delivery. Another neuroactive steroid, pregnanolone, has similar properties. A third, isoallopregnanolone, tamps down the antidepressant effect of allopregnanolone, increasing feelings of stress. In a study of 136 pregnant women published in 2025 in the journal Neuropsychopharmacology, women with an imbalance in pregnanolone and isoallopregnanolone during pregnancy were more likely to develop postpartum depression. Measuring the ratio of these chemicals in the blood could be another way to predict postpartum depression, says reproductive psychiatrist Lauren M. Osborne of Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City, who co-led the study with Payne. Allopregnanolone, meanwhile, has already proved to be a valuable tool for treatment. A synthetic version called brexanolone was developed by Cambridge, Massachusetts-based Sage Therapeutics and was approved by the FDA in 2019, the first drug approved specifically for postpartum depression. Originally provided via 4 infusion, it has been replaced by an oral version, zuranolone, which was received FDA approval in 2023. These are transformative therapies because they work rapidly, write the authors of a 2025 article in the Annual Review of Medicine. Women at high risk of postpartum depression might even benefit from proactively taking zuranolone, though that hasn't yet been tested, says article co-author Samantha Meltzer-Brody, a reproductive psychiatrist at the University of North Carolina who was an academic principal investigator in studies of brexanolone and an investigator in zuranolone trials. The availability of a blood test, she adds, opens up that entire line of questioning on how do you get ahead of it, so you don't have to wait until someone starts suffering? Zeroing in on steroids. Not everyone with postpartum depression has these epigenetic changes, so Payne and other researchers continue to hunt for other biomarkers to understand how hormonal changes trigger postpartum depression. They are zeroing in, for example, on neuroactive steroids, which the body makes from molecules like progesterone in the brain and other tissues. One of those metabolites, called allopregnanolone, has a calming effect. It affects a receptor in the brain called GABA-A, which is known to be involved in stress reduction. Allopregnanolone rises during pregnancy and drops swiftly after delivery. Another neuroactive steroid, pregnanolone, has similar properties. A third, isoallopregnanolone, tamps down the antidepressant effect of allopregnanolone, increasing feelings of stress. In a study of 136 pregnant women published in 2025 in the journal Neuropsychopharmacology, women with an imbalance in pregnanolone and isoallopregnanolone during pregnancy were more likely to develop postpartum depression. Measuring the ratio of these chemicals in the blood could be another way to predict postpartum depression, says reproductive psychiatrist Lauren M. Osborne of Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City, who co-led the study with Payne.